Jesus Christ, you look pathetic, man. My co-worker, his baggy eyes sinking down like a bloodhound, couldn't contain his snort as he swung the plastic swinging door open for me. I scowled at him with as much hatred as I could muster. Shut up, asshole. Shoved past him, squeezing between his slouching form and the shelves of e-cigs contained in their bright fluorescent boxes, screaming out sour raspberry crush and cotton candy, whoever's eyes inevitably drifted to their section behind the register. The truth was, he was right. It looked pathetic. I felt it too. I felt like a slug stuck to the bottom of God's shoe. I slammed my bag down on the counter, careful not to bump my cast against anything. I'd already made that mistake of carelessness, and paid the price heavily. He held his hands up in surrender, his Cheeto-stained fingertips glowing faintly orange in the fluorescent lighting. My bad, dude. I knew it was rough. I just didn't know how rough. He looked like an injury lawsuit billboard. I waved him off, pretending I couldn't be bothered to turn my head to look at him, ignoring the reality that my neck brace physically wouldn't allow it. Just go. Get out of here. Zeke yawned and slung his jacket over his shoulder. Don't have to tell me twice. See ya. I watched him circle around to the break room to leave out the back door, pulling our metal stool up to the register with my ankle. Couldn't be mad at him for pointing out how pathetic I looked, because it was true. Just how I couldn't judge his dark eye bags when I imagined mine looked 10 times worse. Sometimes it felt like there was a hierarchy in the convenience store. There was struggle. Zeke worked from 2 PM to 10 PM, and I stepped in to take the torch until 6. Sometimes, when I was especially displeased with the night shift, I imagined him as a fat king, eating grapes and drinking wine from the bottle at home. It was more likely that he played Call of Duty and took bong rips until he passed out, knowing him. I always convinced myself I liked being alone. Every night the second Zeke left, it felt like reality began to fade. The gas station convenience store at night was like a portal, like some spot between dimensions, half there, half not. It felt like being in school during summer vacation, or visiting a completely empty water park. Sat for a while, just watching out the window, until I couldn't stand in crouching boredom. When that happened, I slipped my headphones over my ears and shuffled to the fridges in the back, cracking open a Red Bull and getting started on my nightly menial tasks. I had just finished sweeping the floors when the bell on the door jingled, signaling my first customer of the night. I struck my headphones to rest awkwardly around my neck brace, pulling out a greeting. It turned out to be a very tired-looking woman, weighed in place and smiled sleepily at me when I joined her at the counter. "Hey," she said, "can you put $30 on 4? "Sure thing." She handed me a 20 and 2 fives. I could feel her looking me up and down, but I ignored it as I rang her up. "What happened to you, if you don't mind me asking?" She said finally, as if she'd mustered up the courage. She pulled the hood of her sweatshirt up over her greasy hair, as if she had to hide after giving in to her curiosity. I waved her off like I had Zeke, struggling to keep the polite smile on my face. "I'm fine, just an accident." Once the woman left and I had watched her dinky Chevy Cruze peel off down the road, I pushed my headphones back up and cranked up the Joy Division playing from my phone. I didn't feel like finishing the sweeping. Checked the time. 12:05. I sighed loudly. I wondered if I could get away with sneaking to the back to take a quick nap. I knew my boss would check the security cameras, and then she would have my ass. I unwrapped a chocolate bar from next to the cash register, making a mental note of how much I owed the till so far. I gave a knowing look to the camera in the corner, pointing to the candy like, "I know, I'll pay it." I popped the entire second half into my mouth, feeling it melt on my tongue, and crumpled the wrapper in a half moon around my index finger. I stared at it for a while, feeling strangely guilty. It was funny how many hours I worked just to end up fat and broke anyways, and it was because during the night shift there was nothing to do but eat. I did a few more tasks before retreating back behind the counter, and I was beginning to drift off with my head in my arms when a strange feeling washed over me. Something felt off. An odd, hot chill crept up the back of my neck, and I felt suddenly violently frustrated and scratch it. I felt like I was being watched. When I looked up, there was a man in front of me, nearly toppled backwards off my stool, and my arm and my head ached sympathetically at the mere concept of falling on them. The man didn't say anything, just stood in front of me, smiling at me. He had brown hair, neatly moosed back, and clear if not slightly pale skin. I would have guessed he was about 45, but I couldn't tell for certain. First thing I noticed was that smile, stretched across his face a little too widely for, check the time again, 2:36 AM, and displayed a sparkling white teeth. Second thing I noticed was his eyes. I couldn't quite tell what colour they were, because they were enveloped by his pupils. One pupil appeared larger than the other, but they were both too big. I immediately wondered if he was on something, although his crisp suit suggested otherwise. "Good evening," I said, choking on the words, quickly taking off my headphones. "I'm sorry, how long were you standing there?" He didn't answer my question, just placed a few things down on the counter. 2 little bottles of vodka, those 90 proof ones with a million different flavours, and a tuna sandwich wrapped up in plastic. Then he pointed. At first I thought he was pointing at me. My blood went cold, but then I followed his gaze to the shelves of cigarettes behind me. "American Spirits," he said. His voice was crisp and clear, just like his suit. "Please." I swallowed. Something about him deeply unnerved me. He had the demeanour and gait of a plastic surgeon, someone a little out of touch with reality, someone with a little too much work done. Why was he at a gas station in the middle of nowhere this early in the morning? Such a nice suit. I swear I'd been gazing sleepily out the windows at the empty parking lot moments before. Why hadn't I seen him get here? "Good choice," I mumbled, glancing at him nervously as I reached for the cigarettes behind me. Didn't want to turn my back to him for some reason. "Those are my favourites." He nodded, the smile growing a tiny bit bigger. I rung him up as quickly as I could. $24, please." He dug in his pocket, and then handed over the money in cash. When I took it, I noticed a slight dark red tint under his fingernails. Followed his hand with my eyes up to his neck, where he scratched at somewhere his collar concealed. When his hand moved, I saw more red staining the white fabric in a few tiny splotches. "Hey man, are you alright?" he asked reluctantly. "Are you hurt or something? Do you need me to call someone?" The man's smile didn't falter, but he mouthed something very quickly, almost like he was trying to speak but the words wouldn't come out. He heard a faint sound of a whisper, squinted at his lips and leaned closer, trying to make out what it could be. "Why seem happy to you?" Spoke so abruptly, and I was focusing so intently on his mouth that I nearly jumped again. "What? Would you think that my life is good and will remain good?" I looked him over. Nice clothes, big smile, he looked successful. I didn't know about happy. "Sure." He stared at me for another few seconds. People seemed to contract a little, and his eyes bore into me. However, no matter how hard I tried, I could not look away. "Take care of yourself," he said cheerfully, and then he gathered up his purchases and he left. After that, I felt shaky. I didn't want to stay there at the counter in case he came back, so I slinked out back, clumsily putting on my jacket with one arm and feeling for my box of American Spirits. It took me an embarrassingly long amount of time to light up. My body awkwardly leaning against the wall and my knobby knees crammed against my chest. I couldn't wait to get my cast off. As I smoked and tried to calm down, I found myself staring straight ahead into the dark woods that surrounded the gas station. The trees towered over me, completely still except for the slight sway caused by the chilling breeze that hummed through the air. In those trees, I could make out a strange shape, one that moved a little differently from the foliage. It almost looked like a person. When I finally got home at 6:30, I was so relieved I almost cried. I slumped back in my bed watching the dim sunlight start to creep through my bedroom blinds. That was another con of the night shift. I didn't get to sleep until it was bright outside. I rolled onto my good side, taking my phone out of my pocket and scrolling through a few notifications from my friends that I had ignored under the guise of being at work. I knew I didn't fool them. Being at work had never stopped me from texting them back before, but they couldn't say anything about it. I just wasn't ready yet. "Hey, sorry, home now, going to bed, good night." I tossed my phone in a pile of dirty laundry after I hit send, and gingerly laid my head on my pillow. I thought I wasn't even tired, but just closed my eyes for a second, but when I opened them, it was already golden hour and my stomach was grumbling. It was so depressing to sleep all day sometimes. Clumsily shoved an off-brand frozen pizza into the toaster oven with my non-broken hand, ate it in a few bites and badly burned my mouth. Took a shower, sat down at my computer for what felt like a second, and before I knew it, it was time for work again. The drive to work always felt sort of eerie to me. By the time I had gotten into my car, it had begun to rain, and my puny old windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the heavy downpour. It really did work in the middle of nowhere. It was about a 15-minute drive away from my studio apartment, and I lived on the edge of the town as it was. The road was gravelly and crowded by trees. So crowded I always began to feel very claustrophobic for a while, right before it opened up into the grove where the gas station waited. If you kept driving, it would be another hour until you reached anything substantial. Anything besides other gas stations or dilapidated sheds. It made me think of the man from the night before. Where had he been going? I pulled in next to Zeke's car, and I ran inside my good arm, sheltering my hair the entire way. Hey, I called out as I shoved open the swinging door. The bell jingled cheerfully to greet me. Man, it's really coming down. Zeke wasn't behind the counter. There was no response for a moment, and I began to feel uneasy. But then he called out from the back room and I sighed in relief. I know. He came out carrying a cardboard box in his arms. It's bullshit. I hate the rain. I squeezed the rain out of my hair carefully. I was suddenly infuriatingly aware of the mind-numbing itchiness of the water trap behind my skin and my neck brace. Hey. I slipped in behind the counter and he set the box down next to me. Red snacks on the side and fresh black Sharpie. You see anyone weird today? He gave me a suspicious look, shrugging on his hoodie. Not any weirder than usual. Oh, okay. I swallowed and picked at the skin around my nails. I was just wondering, last night there was this weird guy. Zeke checked his phone, not really paying attention. It's so weird. I gotta go. Tell me about it tomorrow. I rolled my eyes and nodded. Okay, whatever. See ya. See ya. Like the night before, I didn't realize how lonely it was until he was gone. But unlike the night before, now I felt like I had a reason to feel strange. I listened to the rain come down against the roof and tried to hone in on my work, lugging the box of snacks over to the shelves to restock. There were a few customers who came and went like always. Between catering to them and immersing myself in tasks, my cranked up music, I almost forgot all about the strange man. Things felt normal again, and I was just an employee working in a convenience store as I always had been. It wasn't until 2 came around again. At 2, it finally stopped raining, and the sudden silence began to make me feel unsettled. At 2:15, I took my smoke break, and when I came back inside around 2:30, something felt different. I hung up my damp jacket, taking my sweet time with it. Didn't want to go back out there yet. When I finally decided to suck it up, and I peered around the doorframe of the break room, he was there, standing in front of the counter, staring. Bit down hard on the inside of my cheek and tasted blood. Hello, called out, walking over to the register. Good evening. Back again? He didn't say anything. I hadn't really expected him to. His smile seemed more shrunken than the night before, and so did his pupils. His skin looked a little less clear, a little more grey. His suit seemed dishevelled, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why, and this time I could clearly see a spot of blood soaking through his collar. He scratched at it every few seconds, his hand lingering there, almost like he was trying to hide it from me. He was sort of hunched over now, as if he was in pain. He'd placed the same items on the counter as the night before. 2 tiny bottles of vodka, 1 tuna sandwich. American spirits, please, he said finally, his voice slightly scratchy. It sounded like the feeling of skinning your knee. I pressed my lips together and retrieved them for him. What are you up to tonight? I had to ask. I had to know. He made me so deeply uncomfortable that it circled around to twisted curiosity. The man laughed, but it didn't quite sound like a laugh. It sounded more like a cry. He took out 24 crumpled up dollars and placed them in front of me on the counter. There are bad people out there, he told me, staring at me. I blinked a few times and nodded. You're right. My voice broke a little. Couldn't help it. It gave me the creeps. The man seemed to like this answer. He took what he'd bought and smiled at me widely again. Almost looked painful to smile that way. Take care of yourself. It took me a moment to process that he was leaving. When I finally did, I rushed around the counter and to the door, wanting to see where he went, what he drove, something. Saw nothing. No trace. Rushed under my breath and sprinted as quickly as I could to the back room. I crouched in front of the big boxy work computer, typing in my password, signing into the security live cam. Rapidly I flipped through them, searching for any that would have him on them. When I finally found one, I had to go back because I almost missed it. The man wasn't getting into a car, or even showing any signs of having one at all. He was walking straight back into the forest, gait strangely stiff and plastic. As soon as I saw him disappear between the trees, I turned off the computer and stared at my reflection in the black screen, unsure of what to think at all. Work double hours, I mumbled, my face growing hot from my very apparent desperation. Hated to beg, or to ask for anything at all really, but I felt it was necessary. I was on my last straw. Jodie signed a piece of paper aggressively, as if she were trying to rip through it with the tip of her pen, then brought the back end to her lips. Her unwashed hair, frizzy from application upon application of Pox black hair dye, was tied back in a ponytail, which made her look like she'd gotten work done. Maybe that was the intention. No, she said it in a long breath, like my name was just a byproduct of an exasperated sigh. She rubbed at her temples. You know, I would love to help you, honey, but this is what you signed up for. Besides, I can't afford to pay you overtime. Just didn't want to spend another night waiting. wondering if that terrifying man was going to show up. My anxiety would kill me. Couldn't rest when I was at home either. A smile appeared in my dreams. It haunted me. Still, I hadn't expected her to say yes. Never did. I'd taken this job because I desperately needed it, not for convenience, and she knew it. She knew she had all of the control. My boss stood, surveying the break room as if it was simply an act of habit. It's alright that I can't change your schedule, Noah. He smiled sympathetically in a way that was both saccharine and stiff. Maybe ask me again in the future, and you can make sure to mop during your shifts. Looking a little grimy in here. Didn't tell her about the man. Didn't see the point. He would just give me the same fake, sad smile and pat my shoulder. He would just tell me I was a little too old to believe in ghosts. I couldn't possibly argue with that. I knew what time he would come. 2:36 AM exactly. It was always 2:36. But I realised I hadn't seen any customers since the day before. It wasn't like we bustled in the early hours of the morning. There were always some drunks, some stoners, some late night road trippers, some homeless people. I couldn't remember the last time I saw 0 customers during a shift. At 2, my arms began to prickle with goosebumps. I tried not to stare out the window, not sure I wanted to see him coming at this point. My curiosity got the better of me. At 2:30, I saw something emerge from the trees. It was man-shaped but hunched over, as if he had a particularly bad case of scoliosis, as if his very spine had been bent like a green twig over someone's knee. I knew it was him immediately. Watched him shuffle across the parking lot, one hand gripping my phone in my pocket so tightly with my good hand that I knew my knuckles had to be a splotchy mess of white and red, and I knew they would ache when I finally let go. After what felt like years, the door finally swung open. The bell sounded slightly wrong, like it was just barely off pitch when it jingled. The man moved slowly. Whether out of struggle or to torture me, I couldn't tell. His breath came out hitched and raspy. In his hands, he clutched a wad of cash, as well as a slip of paper. Stared at it, but couldn't figure out what it was. "Why are you here?" I asked against my better judgment as he collected the things he always got. 2 bottles of vodka and a tuna sandwich from the fridge. The man didn't answer. I watched him begin to unfurl, clutching his purchases in his gnarled hands. He smiled at me as he walked towards the counter, spine cracking and popping loudly as he stood up straighter. It was a disgusting, gruesome sound. When he stood up, I could see that his suit hardly looked like a suit anymore. It was very nearly torn to shreds, blood soaking through his white shirt in several places. I was frozen. Felt like I couldn't physically move, even if I was mentally able to tell my body what to do. Just stared at him, led his items towards me. "American spirits, please." I was finally able to back away, reaching behind me blindly for the pack of cigarettes. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted him to leave. His eyes bore into me, pupils now as small as pinpricks, shuddering widely, like flies swimming across the whites of his eyes. "Really stocking up on those, huh?" I asked, my voice coming out weak. I didn't know what else to say. "Yes," he rasped, smile revealing his bright red gums and long yellow teeth. "But I'll never smoke them. I can't." He handed me the money. I took it, my hand shaking uncontrollably. The man then slowly held out the other piece of paper, turning it over so I could see it. Fluorescent lights buzzed loudly in my ears, making it impossible to think. It was a photograph. A photograph of 2 children, both with brown hair, gripping each other under a tree, a girl and a boy. Both were maybe around 6 or 7. Their faces were frozen in a laugh, the kind of laugh that only children can do, their eyes scrunched up and their mouths open wide to the sky. I looked back up at the man, unsure of why he was showing me this, still staring at me. "Did they look happy?" I swallowed. My mouth was suddenly incredibly dry. Felt like I might suffocate. "Yeah," I muttered. All I could get out was a mutter. "They do." The man's smile faded, just a little bit and just for a second, but I caught it. He did nothing but catch it. He mouthed something very quickly, but this time I caught that too. It could have been. I felt like I might throw up. I just watched in horror, unable to do anything as he reached out and took my working hand, dirty blood-stained palm brushing against mine. I watched as he slowly bent every finger but my index, stared into my face as he wrapped the photograph of the 2 children around my finger in a half moon. I know why you don't recognize me. Couldn't look up at him, couldn't look away from my hand. Thought about pulling away, thought about running, locking myself in the break room and calling someone, dialing 911. Would the police even help within this situation? What could they do? A foreboding sense of hopelessness washed over my entire body. I should call someone. I don't know if he said it or if it was a thought. Bounced around in my head, a deafening whisper. I looked up at him. He wasn't smiling anymore, and his mouth was not moving. I should call someone. Get out of my head. Get out of my head, I tried to say. No words came out. He'd only mouth it. I should call someone. I should call someone. I should call someone. Should. I should. It could have been. It could have been. It could have been. I didn't go back to work after that. I left in the middle of the night and drove home, completely numb and barely even conscious. I lay in my bed for what was probably days with my curtains drawn. I ignored the calls from my boss, from Zeke, from my friends. I knew I was fired. I knew I was destroying my own life. It somehow felt better than the alternative of seeing that man again. I didn't care anymore. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't get him out of my head. I was able to sleep. I dreamed of a time when I was a kid. I'd been skateboarding down the hill next to my house. It was that sweet spot period where I hadn't injured myself enough yet to be scared of things. So careening down an asphalt death slope only had my heart racing in excitement. That was about to change. The last second, a neighbour's dog, a little terrier, ran out in front of me. I remember it so vividly. There wasn't nearly enough time to stop or get out of the way, and I collided with the little creature at an extremely high speed. I remember skidding across the pavement, my knees and the palms of my hands torn to shreds. I knew the dog hadn't survived immediately. I could just feel it. I was so sad for the dog, but I was also so angry because I was hurt, and I was scared of facing the consequences of coming clean. I didn't tell anyone, ever. In reality, it had died nearly instantly. In my dreams, though, the dog is still alive, but barely. Its face is bloody and ripped apart by the wheels of my skateboard. It has his voice, raspy and barely there. Know why you don't recognize me, looking like this. I woke up one night to something loud. I sat up quickly and cried out at a deep stabbing pain in my neck. It sounded like metal grinding and gasoline spilling onto pavement. It smelled of smoke, thick, hot and poisonous in my nostrils and filling up my lungs. And then, faintly in the distance, I could swear I heard a voice. I knew exactly who it was. I left my room as if I was still dreaming. It wasn't that I wanted to, I just knew there was no real choice. There was no avoiding what waited for me. It felt weird to open the front door after so long, like opening a portal to a forgotten world. And as soon as I did, I saw him. There was no metal, no gasoline, just a man. He lay in front of my door, body horrifically twisted and crumpled into an empty half-moon shape like the wrapper of my chocolate bar. He wasn't wearing his suit, he wasn't smiling. He was wearing what looked like used to be pajamas, but now could barely even do their job of concealing his flesh. But where his shoulder met his throat, a yellowish white bone protruded out of him, gushing blood onto my doorstep. His face was unrecognisable from how it looked in a convenience store. I know why you don't recognise me. He looked up at me, but only with his eyes. The rest of his body was still, except for an occasional twitch. His lips parted, and he began to try and speak. All he could do was mouth the words, "Help me." I knelt down in front of him, tears springing to my eyes and then streaming down my cheeks. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry. I should have called someone." I got up and I walked to my car. I drove all the way to where it happened, to that claustrophobic part of the road, in silence, my hands shaking against the steering wheel. Now I'm sitting here, next to the tree that man's car had wrapped around. It's bent and cracked down the middle, and there's a hint of a spinning tyre and dried blood still on the pavement. Other than that, there's no evidence of what happened here a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to call the police. I'm going to tell them everything. Tell them about the night it happened. My friends had been messaging me all day, begging me to skip work and meet them at the bar. How I had felt so isolated recently working the night shift. Tell them how I offered Zeke $100 to cover my shift. He'd agreed because he didn't have anything better to do. How I'd been drinking at work that day, not wanting to front the cost of buying watered down drinks at the bar. Tell the police how I left before Zeke even got there, because I knew he'd be able to tell I was tipsy, right at 2:36 AM. How I picked out 2 little bottles of flavoured vodka to sneak in, and a tuna sandwich to hopefully soak up some of the alcohol before my drive. I didn't actually plan on eating. Just wanted to feel morally just. Fresh pack of American spirits I shoved into my back pocket before tucking $24 into the till. Tell them about how I knew I wasn't driving great, and I was going too fast but I didn't slow down. Tell them about seeing the car coming in the opposite lane, the headlights making me squint right at the most narrow part of the road, how I swerved into their lane. Tell the police about swerving back out of his lane right at the last second and slamming on the brakes, nicking a tree, the airbags deploying, cracking sound to the deep, excruciating pain in my neck and my right arm. Tell them about getting out of my car and witnessing what I'd caused, and how I immediately threw up on the side of the road. Scar had been completely crushed around a tree after he'd spun out of control trying to avoid hitting me, crumpled into a half-moon shape. I could hear him breathing, a horrible raspy sound. Crept over to the driver's door, and there he was, all blood and blown and glazed over eyes. I should call someone, I thought, but fear had swallowed me whole. My life would be destroyed. I was a drunk driver. I had ended someone's life. It's all my fault. I didn't know if he had kids, if he was married or alone. Maybe he was a bad person, I tried to tell myself, and I had done the world a favour. Why was he out so late anyways? No matter what I told myself, I knew what this was. I was a murderer, and I couldn't face that. I'll tell the police how I watched him die. I waited until he took his last breath, my fingers wrapped tightly around my phone in my pocket, and then I drove away. I'm about to report myself. I just wanted to put this out there. Someone could hear the story and maybe think harder about their decisions. Everyone wants to say they know exactly what they'd do in a bad situation, how they'd handle it. I know firsthand that that isn't true. Everyone is a coward. I hope when I'm locked away, he's at peace. I hope his children live long, happy lives. I'm sorry.